What if the billionaire owner of a major airline boarded one of his own flights, not as a CEO in a tailored suit, but as an ordinary passenger, blending into the crowd? What if he saw, with his own eyes, the corruption and prejudice poisoning the company he built from nothing? At John F. Kennedy International Airport, one man's quiet journey would ignite a battle for justice, challenging power, shattering biases, and rewriting what's possible. Before we dive in, drop a comment. What time are you reading this, and where are you? We'd love to hear from you. The morning sun spilled golden light across the sprawling chaos of JFK International Airport, its rays glinting off glass terminals, and the polished fuselages of planes parked at distant gates. Terminal 4 buzzed with the pulse of New York City, a symphony of rolling suitcases, boarding calls in multiple languages, and the low hum of countless voices weaving stories of departure and arrival. Giant LED screens loomed over the check-in counters, flashing sleek commercials for Blue Horizon Airlines. The tagline, "Where you're always valued," glowed in bold white letters, promising an unparalleled travel experience. But beneath the polished veneer, the reality was far less welcoming. Ethan Caldwell stepped into the terminal, his worn sneakers scuffing softly against the polished floor. At 45, he carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd fought for every inch of his success. Dressed in a plain white t-shirt, dark jeans, and a faded black backpack slung over one shoulder, he blended seamlessly into the sea of travelers. No one would have guessed that this unassuming man was the billionaire owner of Blue Horizon Airlines, a company he'd built from a single lease plane into a national powerhouse. Ethan's roots ran deep in the working class, his father a baggage handler at LaGuardia, his mother a cleaner who scrubbed airport restrooms to make ends meet. Those memories drove him and kept him grounded, even as his wealth soared into the stratosphere. Today, he wasn't here as a CEO. He was just another passenger, his first-class ticket tucked into his pocket, his sharp eyes scanning the terminal for the truth. The board had been pressing him for weeks, citing declining profits and urging cost-cutting measures. Ethan didn't trust their spreadsheets or their sanitized reports. He wanted to see his company, his people through the lens of reality, not PowerPoint slides. As he moved through the crowd, the air thick with the scent of coffee, jet fuel, and hurried anticipation, he felt the familiar pull of purpose. Something was wrong at Blue Horizon, and he was here to find it. The economy check-in counters were a study in chaos-long lines of weary travelers juggling overstuffed bags, parents wrangling restless children, and the occasional sharp exchange over delayed flights or baggage fees. In stark contrast, the Blue Horizon VIP counter gleamed like a private club, its polished marble surface and gold-accented signage screaming exclusivity. Behind the counter stood Jessica Bent, her navy uniform crisp, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. At first glance, she was the picture of professionalism, but her tight smile and the subtle curl of her lip hinted at something colder disdain, perhaps, or boredom. Ethan joined the VIP line, his backpack slung low. Ahead of him, a man in a tailored suit, William Hayes, judging by the monogrammed luggage tag, tapped his foot impatiently. Jessica's demeanor shifted the moment she saw him, her smile warming, her voice syrupy. "Mr. Hayes, so good to see you again. First class to LA, as usual?" She processed his ticket with a flourish, chatting about his latest business deal as if they were old friends. William smirked, clearly accustomed to the deference. Asterisk when Ethan stepped forward, handing over his ticket and ID. Jessica's smile faltered. Her eyes flicked over his simple outfit, lingering on his sneakers, her expression teetering between confusion and skepticism. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" she asked, her tone laced with condescension, loud enough to draw a glance from a nearby traveler. "I'm quite sure," Ethan replied evenly, his voice calm but firm. Jessica pursed her lips, holding his ID as if it might be counterfeit. She turned to her computer, her fingers tapping deliberately, each keystroke a small act of defiance. The seconds stretched, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic clack of her nails. "This ticket seems unusual," she said finally, her voice dropping into a murmur, though it carried to the other passengers nearby. "I'll need to verify this with a supervisor." Ethan took a measured breath, his patience thinning but his expression neutral. He'd seen this before: judgment based on appearance, assumptions rooted in class or status. It wasn't new, but it stung all the same. Around him, a couple of sharply dressed travelers glanced his way, their curiosity tinged with judgment. A woman in a navy dress, her pearls gleaming, raised an eyebrow as if wondering why someone like him was in the VIP line. Before Ethan could respond, a tall man in a navy suit approached, his polished shoes clicking against the tile. David Thornton, the manager of Blue Horizon's JFK operations, carried himself with an air of effortless authority, his tailored suit and slick-back hair screaming corporate ambition. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his eyes flicking to Jessica before settling on Ethan, his gaze more evaluative than welcoming. Jessica straightened, her tone deferential. "Mr. Thornton, I just needed confirmation on this gentleman's ticket. It seemed unusual for this counter." David didn't respond immediately. He studied Ethan, his eyes lingering on the t-shirt and backpack, his lips curving into a tight smile that felt more dismissive than polite. "Everything appears to be in order," he said finally, handing the ticket back to Jessica with a nod. "Make sure to expedite this, please." "Yes, Mr. Thornton," Jessica replied, her reluctance palpable. David turned to Ethan, offering a handshake that felt perfunctory. "Enjoy your flight," he said, his voice smooth but distant. "Thank you," Ethan replied, meeting David's gaze with quiet confidence. As David walked away, Ethan couldn't shake the weight of the encounter. Jessica's behavior wasn't just poor service. It was a symptom of a deeper culture, one David seemed to tolerate, if not encourage. The phrase David had used, "reprioritize our regulars," echoed in Ethan's mind, a coded justification for bias. As Ethan moved toward the gate, he lingered near a coffee kiosk, his eyes scanning the terminal. At a nearby economy counter, a middle-aged woman argued with a staff member, her voice quivering as she explained her luggage met weight requirements. The agent responded curtly, barely looking up. A few steps away, a young man was pulled aside at security for an additional search, despite clearing the metal detector. Ethan's jaw clenched. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns. Then he overheard a hushed conversation near the gate. Emily Nguyen, a young gate agent in a Blue Horizon uniform, was restocking boarding passes, her hands moving quickly. Another employee, a cashier from the nearby snack stand, leaned in. "You worked until midnight again?" the cashier whispered. Glancing around, Emily nodded, her voice low. "I don't have a choice," Jessica said. "If I don't cover extra shifts, they'll cut my hours. And Mr. Thornton, he doesn't care." The cashier frowned but didn't reply. Ethan's grip tightened on his coffee cup. This wasn't just about customer service. This was about control, fear, a system that punished those who didn't conform. He pulled out a small notebook, jotting down what he'd seen. Jessica's condescension, David's indifference, Emily's exhaustion. Then he accessed the Blue Horizon employee database on his phone, searching for a lead. Ryan Mitchell, a former gate supervisor who'd left after a year, caught his eye. No exit interview, no recorded reason for departure. Suspicious. He typed a message. "Hi Ryan, this is Ethan Caldwell, CEO of Blue Horizon. I'd like to discuss your time at JFK. I understand if you're hesitant, but I'd appreciate a few minutes. Please let me know when and where works for you." He hit send, expecting a delay. Most ex-employees ignored corporate outreach, too jaded or too wary to revisit the past. But his phone buzzed almost instantly. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Brood awakening near Terminal 4. You're buying. Ethan smiled faintly. Deal, he replied. He glanced back at the gate, where Emily was now scanning boarding passes, her shoulders slumped. The LED screen above flickered with another Blue Horizon ad, the tagline mocking the reality below. This wasn't just a flight anymore. This was the start of a fight one Ethan was ready to wage. The morning air outside Terminal 4 at JFK was sharp with the tang of jet fuel and the distant rumble of taxiing planes. But inside Brood Awakening, a small coffee shop tucked between a newsstand and a duty-free store, the atmosphere was warm, heavy with the scent of roasted beans and buttery pastries. Ethan Caldwell settled into a corner booth, his worn notebook open on the scratched wooden table, a black coffee steaming in front of him. The hum of early travelers and baristas calling orders faded into the background as he glanced at his watch. 7:55 a.m. Ryan Mitchell, the former gate supervisor who'd agreed to meet, was due any minute. Ethan's fingers tapped the edge of his notebook, his mind replaying the events of yesterday. Jessica Bennett's condescension, David Thornton's indifference, Emily Nguyen's whispered fear. This wasn't just a bad day at Blue Horizon. This was a culture rotting from within. Ethan's phone buzzed, a curt email from Margaret Ellis, a major shareholder, pressing for strategic adjustments to stabilize stock prices. He ignored it, his focus locked on the meeting ahead. Ryan's quick response to his outreach had been surprising, but Ethan knew trust wouldn't come easily. People who'd left Blue Horizon under David Thornton's reign carried scars, and Ethan needed Ryan to open up if he was going to uncover the truth. At exactly 8 a.m., the door jingled, and a man in his early 30s stepped inside. Ryan. Mitchell had the weary posture of someone who'd spent too many nights working graveyard shifts, his dark hair cropped short, his eyes guarded as they scanned the room. He wore a faded denim jacket and carried a small duffel bag, his steps hesitant until he spotted Ethan. "You Caldwell?" he asked, his voice low, skeptical, as he approached but didn't sit. "That's me," Ethan said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Coffee's on me." Ryan slid into the booth, his duffel bag thumping against the floor. A barista dropped off a black coffee, and Ryan wrapped his hands around the mug, his knuckles rough from years of manual work. For a moment, neither spoke. Ethan let the silence settle, watching Ryan's guarded expression, knowing he needed to earn his trust. "So," Ryan said finally, his eyes flicking up, "you're really the CEO? Why's a guy like you slumming it with ex-employees?" Ethan leaned back, his tone steady. "Because I saw something yesterday at Terminal 4 that didn't sit right. Employees afraid to speak, customers treated like they don't matter unless they're flashing a Rolex. I need to know what's going on, and I think you can help." Ryan took a slow sip of coffee, his gaze unwavering. "You want the truth about Thornton? It's not pretty." "I'm not here for pretty," Ethan said, opening his notebook. "Tell me." Ryan exhaled, his shoulders loosening slightly. "It started small extra shifts, no overtime pay. I thought it was just a job, you know? Airports are tough. But Thornton, he's got this way of making you feel like you're nothing if you don't play his game. If you complained, your hours got cut. If you pushed back, you'd find errors in your paycheck hours missing, bonuses gone. He never yelled, never got his hands dirty, but he made sure you knew who was in charge." Ethan's pen moved quickly, capturing every word. "And the company? No one followed up on complaints?" Ryan snorted, a bitter edge to his voice. "We tried. I filed reports. So did others. They'd go to Thornton's office and poof gone. He'd do these fake inspections, shake hands, promise to look into it. Nothing changed. Then I heard he was buddies with some higher-ups, so complaints never made it past JFK. Ethan's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a bad manager. This was a system protecting itself. You mentioned higher-ups. Anyone specific? Ryan hesitated, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in. Not names, but whispers. Thornton's got connections, vendors, contractors. I overheard him once, talking about special deals with some company that handles supplies. Sounded like he was skimming something, but I never saw proof. Ethan jotted down vendors, special deals, his mind racing. And others? Anyone else tried to speak up? Laura Carter, Ryan said, his voice softening. Gate agent, good worker. She reported Thornton for docking her pay after she refused extra shifts. Next week, she was fired for policy violations. No one's heard from her since. That's when I knew I had to get out. Ethan underlined Laura Carter. Why'd you leave, Ryan? Ryan looked down at his coffee, his jaw tight. I couldn't keep looking the other way. The stress, the threats, it was eating me alive. I quit before it broke me. He met Ethan's gaze, his eyes hard. So what's your play? You gonna fire Thornton and call it a day? Ethan shook his head. This isn't just about Thornton. It's about the whole damn system. But I need evidence, and I need people like you to help me get it. Ryan studied him for a long moment and nodded slowly. All right, I'll tell you what I know. But you better be ready for a fight. I am, Ethan said, his voice firm. Let's start from the top. By noon, Ethan was back at JFK, boarding a Blue Horizon flight to Los Angeles. The first-class cabin was a world of polished luxury plush leather seats, soft lighting, and the faint clink of champagne glasses. But the tension from his meeting with Ryan lingered, sharpening his focus as he settled into seat 1A. He pulled his backpack under the seat, his phone discreetly set to record audio, tucked into an outer pocket. He wasn't just a passenger today. He was a hunter, tracking the truth. The cabin crew moved with practiced efficiency, their navy uniforms crisp, their smiles professional. Jessica Bennett was among them, stationed a few rows ahead, her blonde bun gleaming under the cabin lights. Her demeanor was polished, but Ethan caught the subtle edge in her movements, brisk, almost militant. Across from him, William Hayes, the VIP from the check-in counter, adjusted his gold watch, already signaling for service. Jessica appeared instantly, her smile warm, almost fawning. Mr. Hayes, your usual scotch? She asked, her tone dripping with deference. Of course, William replied, leaning back with a smug grin. Jessica returned with a crystal glass and lingered, chatting about his latest merger. The exchange was seamless, rehearsed, a performance of privilege. Ethan raised a hand, politely signaling Jessica. Her smile faded as she approached, her expression neutral, as if bracing for a chore. Yes? She asked, her voice curt. A glass of water, please, Ethan said evenly. She nodded, her hesitation brief but noticeable. I'll get that for you in a moment. But the moment stretched into minutes. Ethan watched as she handed a blanket to another passenger, a woman in a designer suit, before disappearing into the galley. When she finally returned, she placed the water on his tray table with a perfunctory nod. No words, no eye contact. Thank you, Ethan said, his tone firm but polite. She didn't respond, already moving to William's side to refill his drink. Ethan's frustration simmered, but he kept his composure. This wasn't just rudeness. It was a pattern, one he'd seen at the check-in counter and now here in the air. He glanced across the aisle, where a young flight attendant, Sarah Coleman, was helping an elderly passenger adjust their seat. Unlike Jessica, Sarah's smile was genuine, her movements calm, her voice warm. Let me know if you need anything else, she told the passenger, who nodded gratefully as the flight leveled off. Ethan caught Sarah's eye and gestured for her attention. She approached, her expression open. "Can I help you, sir? I just wanted to say you're doing a great job," Ethan said, lowering his voice. "It's not easy keeping everyone happy up here." Sarah's smile widened, but there was a flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. "Thank you. It's a challenging day." "Seems like it," Ethan said, probing gently. "Long shifts?" She hesitated, glancing toward Jessica, who was now laughing with William. "Sometimes," she said carefully. "We do what we're told." Before Ethan could press further, a commotion erupted from the economy section. A passenger had collapsed near the restroom, their labored breathing audible over the hum of the engines. Sarah's face tightened, and she rushed toward the back, Ethan following instinctively. The passenger, an older man, was pale, clutching his chest. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice steady. "Sir, can you hear me? We're getting help." Nearby attendant called for medical assistance, but Jessica appeared, her heels clicking with authority. She took one look at the scene and shook her head. "He stays here," she said sharply. "We can't disrupt first class." Sarah blinked, incredulous. "Jessica, he needs space to lie down. First class has room." Jessica's expression hardened. "And what do you think the other passengers will say?" "Handle it here." Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "This man's health is more important than optics. Move him to first class." Jessica turned to him, her eyes cold. "Sir, we have protocols." "Protocols that prioritize appearances over people." Ethan shot back, his frustration breaking through. The cabin went quiet, passengers craning to watch. Jessica stiffened, her composure faltering, but before she could respond, a doctor from economy stepped forward, stabilizing the man. Sarah and Ethan helped move him to a quieter area. Ignoring Jessica's glare dot, as Ethan returned to his seat, he caught Sarah's eye. She mouthed a silent thank you, her expression a mix of relief and unease. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. Jessica's behavior wasn't just personal. It was a reflection of a culture David Thornton had cultivated. And Ethan was going to tear it down. Ethan's hotel room in Los Angeles was a stark contrast to the frenetic energy of JFK, a quiet space with a view of the glittering city skyline. He sat at the desk, his laptop open to Blue Horizon's internal database, scrolling through employee records for the JFK branch. The numbers were damning. In the past year, over 30 employees had quit, far higher than other hubs. When he filtered by demographics, a pattern emerged. Most were women, people of color, or older workers. His frown deepened. This wasn't just bias. This was targeted. He picked up his phone and dialed Laura Carter, the former gate agent Ryan had mentioned. Her voice was wary when she answered. "I don't know if I should be talking to you," she said. "I get it," Ethan said, his tone calm. "But I need to know why you left." "Ryan mentioned you reported Thornton." A long pause, then a sigh. "Yeah, he docked my pay because I wouldn't work doubles. I filed a complaint, and he fired me for insubordination. Said I'd never work in the industry again." "Did you ever hear about vendor deals?" Ethan asked another silence, then a hesitant. "There were rumors. Thornton was tight with some supplier big contracts, no bids. I never saw proof, but it felt off." Ethan thanked her and ended the call, his mind racing. Thornton wasn't just bullying employees. He was potentially profiting off the companies. By evening, Ethan had arranged to meet David Thornton at his lax office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. David sat behind a glass desk, his navy suit impeccable, his smile practiced but cold. "Mr. Caldwell," he greeted, gesturing to a chair. What brings you to Lax? Ethan didn't sit. I'm here about your JFK operations, he said, placing a printout on the desk. High turnover, complaints disappearing, employees too scared to speak up. Care to explain? David barely glanced at the paper. Airports are high-pressure environments. Turnover is normal. Lavra Carter says she was fired for reporting you, Ethan said, his voice even. David's smile tightened. I don't recall every employee. If she had issues, she should have followed protocol. She says you ignored protocols, Ethan pressed. David leaned back, his tone patronizing. Look, I can't micromanage every gate agent. There. Not happy, they leave. That's life. Ethan let the silence stretch. David's eyes flickered, betraying unease. I'll be looking into this further, Ethan said, turning to leave. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard David's phone buzz. He didn't need to hear the conversation to know David was calling Jessica, likely warning her about the troublemaker passenger. That night, back at JFK, David gathered his team in a cramped office near the gates. Sarah stood near the back, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. Emily wrung her hands, her face pale. The other agents and attendants shifted nervously. David scanned the room, his expression unreadable. We've got a problem, he said, his voice low, deliberate. Someone's sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. A heavy silence settled over the group. If any of you think about talking to the wrong people, David continued, his tone tightening, you'll regret it. This is my operation, and I decide what happens here. No one spoke. But as Sarah passed Emily, their eyes met for a split second, a flicker of defiance, buried but alive. The fluorescent lights of Blue Horizon's Terminal 4 gate area at JFK flickered faintly, casting a sterile glow over the rows of waiting passengers and the hum of boarding announcements. The air was thick with the familiar scent of jet fuel, stale coffee, and the restless energy of travelers. Ethan Caldwell stood near a charging station, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his phone in hand as he reviewed notes from his investigation. The past 2 days, Ryan Mitchell's revelations about David Thornton's intimidation tactics, Lavra Carter's story of wrongful termination, and the tense encounter with Jessica Bennett on the flight had confirmed his worst fears. Blue Horizon's JFK operations were a cesspool of favoritism, fear, and potential corruption. Ethan wasn't just observing anymore. He was building a case, and the stakes were climbing. Inside the gate area, Sarah Coleman worked the check-in counter, her navy uniform neat but her face etched with exhaustion. Her hands moved quickly, scanning boarding passes, but her eyes darted nervously toward the supervisor's office, where David Thornton's silhouette was visible through the frosted glass. Ethan watched from a distance, his instincts prickling. Sarah had been his ally on the flight, her quiet defiance against Jessica's orders a sign of courage buried under years of fear. But courage came with risks, and Ethan knew she was walking a tightrope. The gate was busy, with passengers streaming toward the jetway, but Ethan noticed Jessica lingering near the counter, her blonde bun glinting under the lights, her posture rigid. She wasn't working, just watching. Sarah handed a passenger their boarding pass, then slipped a small USB drive into her pocket, her movements subtle but not invisible. Ethan's stomach tightened. He'd asked Sarah to copy internal schedules and complaint logs, evidence of unpaid overtime and erased grievances. If Jessica saw that, before Ethan could move, Jessica strode forward, her heels clicking sharply. "Sarah," she said, her voice low but venomous, "what's in your pocket?" Sarah froze, her hand hovering near her uniform. "Nothing," she said, her voice barely steady. "Just my phone." Jessica's lips curled into a cold smile. "Don't lie to me. I saw you hide something." She stepped closer, her presence looming. Passengers nearby glanced over, sensing the tension, but no one intervened. "Hand it over." Sarah's face paled, her fingers trembling. Ethan started forward, but a crowd of passengers blocked his path, their suitcases clogging the aisle. He caught Sarah's eye, shaking his head slightly, urging her to stay calm. But Jessica was relentless. "You're making this worse," she hissed, reaching for Sarah's pocket. "I said it's nothing," Sarah snapped, stepping back, her voice louder now, drawing more eyes. The defiance was fleeting but unmistakable, a spark in the darkness. Jessica's smile vanished. "You're done," she said, turning toward the supervisor's office. "Mr. Thornton will hear about this." Ethan pushed through the crowd, his heart racing. He reached Sarah just as she turned away from the counter, her breathing shallow. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what happened?" Her eyes were wide, panicked. "She saw me take the drive. I was trying to get the files you asked for schedules. Complaints. If Thornton finds out." She trailed off, her voice breaking. "I have a kid, Ethan. I can't lose this job." Ethan's chest tightened. He'd learned last night, during a brief call, that Sarah's 6-year-old daughter relied on her income for medical treatments. The stakes weren't just professional, they were personal. "You won't lose it," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not just a passenger, Sarah. I'm the CEO of Blue Horizon. I'm going to fix this, but I need you to trust me." Sarah stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face. "You're—" "What? I'll explain later," Ethan said, glancing toward the office, where Jessica was now speaking to David, her gestures animated. "Keep that drive safe. Don't give it to anyone but me." Sarah nodded, her fear tempered by a glimmer of resolve. "Okay," she whispered, slipping the drive into a hidden pocket. "But they're watching me now." Ethan stepped back, blending into the crowd as David emerged from the office, his navy suit pristine but his expression dark. He scanned the gate area, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Sarah, who was back at the counter, her movements stiff. Ethan's jaw clenched. David wasn't just a manager. He was a predator, and Sarah was in his crosshairs. That night, in a dimly lit office overlooking the JFK tarmac, David Thornton sat at his desk, his laptop screen casting a cold glow across his face. His phone buzzed Jessica, reporting Sarah's suspicious behavior. David's fingers flew over the keyboard, accessing Blue Horizon's internal system. He deleted payroll records, complaint logs, and vendor contracts, every trace of unpaid overtime, every hint of his special deals with suppliers. His jaw was tight, his movements methodical. Ethan Caldwell, the nosy passenger, was a problem. And David wasn't about to let some outsider unravel his empire. He dialed a contact, a shareholder loyal to his cause. "We've got a situation," he said, his voice low. "Some guy's poking around, asking questions. I need you to make sure corporate stays out of it." The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Handle it quietly, David. If this gets out, we're all exposed." David hung up, leaning back in his chair. He'd erased the digital trail. Caldwell had nothing. Or so he thought. Back at his hotel, Ethan refreshed the Blue Horizon database on his laptop, his heart sinking. The files were gone, schedules, complaints, everything. David had anticipated this, had wiped the system clean. Ethan's fists clenched. Without data, his case was shaky, built on testimonies alone. He paced the room, the LA skyline glittering outside, his mind racing. Then his phone buzzed, an anonymous email. No sender name, just a video attachment. Ethan opened it, his breath catching. The grainy footage showed David in his office, speaking to a vendor on speakerphone. "Make sure the invoices look clean. No one's checking the discretionary fund." Ethan's pulse quickened. Ryan Mitchell. It had to be. The former supervisor had come through, risking everything to deliver the smoking gun. Ethan forwarded the video to Ian Foster, A journalist at the New York Post he'd contacted earlier, and typed the message. "This is just the start. Can you meet me at JFK tomorrow?" He hit send, his resolve hardening. David thought he'd won. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The next morning, JFK's Terminal 4 was a hive of activity, the usual chaos amplified by a small crowd of reporters gathered outside the Blue Horizon VIP lounge. David Thornton had called an impromptu press conference, his Navy suit impeccable, his smile practiced as he faced the cameras. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice smooth, almost mournful. "Certain individuals are trying to undermine our operations at JFK, spreading lies about our commitment to customers and employees. Blue Horizon is stronger than ever, and I'm here to set the record straight." The reporters scribbled notes, their cameras flashing. A few employees, including Emily Newman, stood at the edge of the crowd, their expressions wary. Sarah Coleman was absent, still on shift but under scrutiny after yesterday's incident. Ethan stood at the back, his backpack slung low, his face obscured by a baseball cap. He'd arrived early, coordinating with Ian Foster, who was among the reporters, ready to ask the hard questions. Ethan's notebook was tucked away, replaced by a folder of printed evidence, Ryan's video, Laura Carter's written testimony, and a recovered email from David to a vendor. Courtesy of Ryan's quick thinking, David continued, his tone growing. "Boulder, these accusations are baseless, a distraction from our mission to deliver premium service. Our employees are valued, our customers prioritized. Anyone suggesting otherwise doesn't understand how this industry works." A voice cut through the murmurs. "Is that so?" The crowd parted, heads turning as Ethan stepped forward, his cap removed, his posture commanding. David's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Ethan held up the folder, his voice steady but resonant. "Ethan Caldwell, CEO and owner of Blue Horizon Airlines. And I've got a few things to clarify." The reporters gasped, pens freezing mid-scribble. Cameras swiveled to Ethan, capturing the moment. David's face drained of color, his confidence crumbling. "This is ridiculous," he stammered, forcing a laugh. "You're not—" "I am," Ethan said, cutting him off. He opened the folder, holding up a printed email. "This is correspondence between you and a vendor, discussing inflated invoices to hide payments from the discretionary fund. Payments that benefited you personally." David scoffed, but his voice trembled. "That's fabricated." Ethan raised another document. "This is Laura Carter's testimony, detailing how you fired her for reporting wage theft. And this," he held up a USB drive, "is a video of you instructing a vendor to falsify records." Asterisk. The crowd was silent, the air electric with shock. Ian Foster stepped forward, his voice cutting through. "Mr. Thornton, care to comment on these allegations?" David's jaw twitched, his eyes darting to the exits. "This is a setup," he said, his voice rising. "You're trying to ruin me." "No," Ethan said, his tone unyielding. "You did that yourself." He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying. Blue Horizon was built on respect for employees, for customers. What I've seen here, fear, favoritism, corruption goes against everything this company stands for. A new voice broke the tension. "He's right." Sarah Coleman pushed through the crowd, her uniform slightly wrinkled, her face pale but resolute. Whispers rippled. She was supposed to be working. "Not here. I've worked under Thornton for years," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "He forced us to work unpaid overtime, threatened our jobs if we spoke up. I was almost fired yesterday for trying to help." Another voice joined her. "It's true." Emily Newton stepped forward, her hands shaking but her gaze steady. "He made us feel like we didn't matter, but we do." Ryan Mitchell emerged from the sidelines, his denim jacket a stark contrast to the corporate suits. "I quit because of Thornton," he said, his voice firm. "He erased complaints, cheated employees, and pocketed money that wasn't his." The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. A familiar face appeared, Henry Walsh, the elderly passenger from Ethan's flight, his weathered features set with determination. "I saw it too," he said, his voice carrying. "On my flight, Thornton's staff ignored a sick passenger because it might disrupt first class. This man," he pointed to Ethan, "stood up for what was right." The tide turned. Margaret Ellis, the shareholder who'd pressured Ethan days ago, stepped forward, her expression grim but resolute. "I've seen the evidence." She sighed, her voice commanding. "Mr. Caldwell has my full support. Blue Horizon needs change, and it starts now." David's face twisted, his composure gone. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I built this operation." "You broke it," Ethan said, stepping closer. "Effective immediately. You're terminated." David laughed, a hollow sound. "You think you can just fire me? You'll regret this." "I doubt it," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering. Security officers moved in, their presence quiet but firm. David jerked away at first, but as he looked around, no allies, no sympathy, his shoulders slumped. They escorted him out, his figure fading into the terminal's chaos. The crowd erupted in murmurs, reporters shouting questions. Ethan turned to Sarah, Emily, and Ryan, his voice soft. "Thank you. This wouldn't have happened without you." Sarah's eyes glistened, but she smiled. "We're not done yet, are we?" "No," Ethan said, his resolve unshaken. "This is just the beginning." The boardroom of Blue Horizon Airlines headquarters in New York City was a fortress of corporate power, its glass walls framing a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline, the Hudson River glinting in the late morning sun. The air was crisp, with the scent of polished wood and fresh coffee, but the atmosphere crackled with tension, as if the room itself anticipated a storm. Ethan Caldwell stood at the head of a long mahogany table, his dark blazer sharp but understated, his eyes scanning the 12 board members seated before him. Less than 24 hours after David Thornton's public termination at JFK, the board had summoned Ethan for an emergency session. He knew what this was, a test, a chance for the old guard to claw back control. At the center of the table sat Charles Bennett, a wiry man in his late 60s with thinning hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. His tailored suit and gold cufflinks screamed privilege, and his voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Ethan," he began, his tone measured but patronizing, "you've made quite a spectacle at JFK. While we appreciate your enthusiasm, this board is concerned about the fallout. Stock prices are volatile. Our legal team is fielding questions, and now we're hearing grumblings from other branches. You've opened a Pandora's box." Ethan folded his hands, his expression calm but unyielding. "I didn't open it, Charles. It was already wide open. I just shone a light inside." A few board members shifted uncomfortably, their pens tapping against notepads. Charles leaned back, his fingers steepled. "That's precisely the problem. You've turned a single manager's missteps into a national headline. Perception matters in this industry, and right now, Blue Horizon looks unstable." "Unstable?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, his voice steady. "What's unstable is a system that lets managers like Thornton exploit employees and siphon company funds. Ignoring that would have cost us more than a few headlines." Margaret Ellis, the shareholder who'd backed Ethan at the press conference, cleared her throat. "Ethan's right," she said, her voice firm but measured. "Thornton's actions were a liability. Addressing them publicly shows strength, not weakness." Charles's smile tightened, his eyes flicking to Margaret before returning to Ethan. "Strength is one thing," he said, "but your approach firing a manager in front of cameras, Encouraging employees to air grievances is reckless. If every worker starts demanding better pay or shorter hours, where does it end? Can we afford that? Yes, Ethan said simply, his voice cutting through the murmurs that followed. He placed a folder on the table and flipped it open, revealing charts and financial projections. I had our analytics team run the numbers. Thornton's branch had the highest turnover in the company, 30 employees in a year. Replacing them cost more than paying fair wages and overtime would have. He turned the page, pointing to a graph. Branches with better conditions, like Seattle, show higher retention, better customer satisfaction, and a 12% increase in ticket sales. Exploiting workers doesn't save money, it bleeds it. The room went quiet, board members leaning forward to study the data. Charles's smirk faded, his fingers tightening around his pen. Ethan pressed on, his voice steady but forceful. If we implement a company-wide planned fair pay, mandatory overtime, anonymous reporting will cut turnover and avoid lawsuits. If we don't, we're looking at federal investigations, class action suits, and a brand no one trusts. Other airlines are watching. They'll poach our best people and our customers if we don't act. Silence. Charles opened his mouth, but another voice cut through. He's got a point. Evelyn Harper, a veteran board member with a sharp gaze, folded her hands. I didn't invest in Blue Horizon to watch it collapse under bad management. Ethan's plan makes sense financially and morally. Charles's jaw twitched, his composure slipping. The room's dynamic shifted, Margaret, and Evelyn's support tipping the scales. Ethan closed the folder, his voice softening but resolute. This isn't just about numbers. It's about who we are. My parents worked jobs like the ones at JFK, long hours, no respect. I built this company to be different. If we lose that, we lose everything. Asterisk. The board didn't vote that day, but Charles's silence as Ethan left was telling. He wasn't finished, not yet. Ethan knew men like Charles didn't surrender power easily. Ethan's hotel room in New York was a quiet refuge, the city's neon glow filtering through the window as he sat at his desk, laptop open. The victory in the boardroom felt fleeting. Charles Bennett's influence ran deep, and Ethan sensed a counterattack brewing. His phone buzzed with an email from a regional manager in Chicago, reporting staffing issues at Blue Horizon's O'Hare branch. The vague wording set off alarms. Ethan opened the attached report and frowned. Employees were still being forced to work unpaid overtime, their schedules manipulated to hide violations. The manager, Greg Sullivan, had dismissed complaints, writing, "This is standard practice. Employees need to adapt." Ethan's fists clenched. This wasn't just resistance, it was defiance, a signal that Thornton's allies were digging in. He booked a red-eye flight to Chicago, his resolve hardening. If he wanted his reforms to take root, he had to confront this head-on. The next morning, Blue Horizon's O'Hare branch was a whirlwind of activity, its modern terminal packed with commuters and the roar of departing planes. Unlike JFK's gritty chaos, O'Hare gleamed with Nunes glass walls, digital kiosks, and a bustling Blue Horizon counter. But the atmosphere was familiar. Employees moved with mechanical precision, their faces tight with stress. Ethan walked in unannounced, his backpack slung low, his eyes scanning the scene. At the counter, a young employee, Daniel Kim, fumbled with a passenger's boarding pass, his hands trembling under the weight of a long line. Greg Sullivan, a stocky man in his 50s with a permanent scowl, stood nearby, barking orders. "Kim, speed it up. We don't have all day." Daniel flinched, his face reddening, but he nodded and continued. Ethan approached the counter, waiting until Daniel was free. "Rough shift?" he asked, his tone casual. Daniel glanced up, wary. "Yeah, it's busy." He looked toward Greg, who was watching, and lowered his voice. Always is. Ethan nodded, filing away the fear in Daniel's eyes. He waited until Greg stepped into a back office, then followed, knocking sharply. "Greg Sullivan? Ethan Caldwell, CEO. We need to talk." Greg's scowl deepened, but he waved Ethan in. "Didn't know corporate was dropping by," he said, his voice gruff. "What's this about?" "Your schedules," Ethan said, placing a printout on the desk. "Unpaid overtime, manipulated hours." "That stops now." Greg shrugged, leaning. "Dak, we're just keeping up with demand. You want flights on time, don't you?" "Not by breaking labor laws," Ethan said, his voice icy. "Implement the new policies, fair hours, paid overtime. No exceptions." Greg's eyes narrowed. "You don't get how things work out here. Corporate's rules don't fly in the real world." "They do now," Ethan said, standing. "1 week, Greg. Comply or you're out." As Ethan left the office, Daniel lingered near a kiosk, his expression hesitant. Ethan paused, softening his tone. "Daniel, right? If something's wrong, you can tell me." Daniel bit his lip, then whispered, "I want to be a pilot, but I can't afford training. They make us work extra hours, no pay. I'm scared to complain." Ethan's chest tightened. He handed Daniel his card. "You're not alone. I'll make this right, and I'll look into that pilot training. Call me if you need anything." Daniel's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through. Ethan left O'Hare with a new mission. Not just to enforce reforms, but to give employees like Daniel a future. Back in New York, Charles Bennett was orchestrating his own plan. From his corner office, he made discreet calls to shareholders, painting Ethan's reforms as financial suicide. He leaked doctored financial reports to business outlets, suggesting Blue Horizon was hemorrhaging money. Headlines erupted. Blue Horizon in turmoil. CEO Caldwell's reforms sparked chaos. The board, once cautiously supportive, began to waver. Then Charles played his trump card. He announced an emergency meeting to vote on Ethan's removal. Ethan sat in his office, the weight of the headlines pressing against him. His phone buzzed a message from Ian Foster, the Post journalist. "Heard about the board's move? Need a hand?" Ethan typed back, "I've got this." He had two options: compromise his reforms to appease the board or fight back and risk everything. He chose to fight. Instead of battling in the boardroom, Ethan decided to go to the source, Blue Horizon's employees. He scheduled a company-wide live stream, broadcasting to every branch gate agents, flight attendants, mechanics. Standing before the camera, he spoke plainly. "I walked into JFK because I saw injustice," he said, his voice steady. "Workers like you, overworked, underpaid, silenced. I'm fighting for change because it's right and because it's smart business. But some want to keep the old ways. I need to know, do you stand with me?" He invited employees to vote anonymously on his leadership and reforms. Within hours, thousands of responses flooded in, a chorus of voices that had been ignored too long. Ethan exhaled, his fingers tapping his desk. The board meeting loomed, but he wasn't fighting alone anymore. The New York headquarters of Blue Horizon Airlines thrummed with quiet anticipation, the morning light filtering through glass walls to illuminate a sleek conference room where Ethan Caldwell stood. His laptop open to the results of the company-wide livestream vote. Thousands of employees, gate agents, flight attendants, mechanics, and cleaners from JFK to O'Hare to Seattle had cast anonymous ballots on his leadership and the reforms he'd championed. Fair wages, paid overtime, and a whistleblower system to report misconduct without fear. The numbers were overwhelming, a resounding affirmation from voices long silenced. Ethan's fingers brushed the edge of his desk, the Manhattan skyline glittering outside, a symbol of the heights he'd climbed and the fight still ahead. The board meeting was hours away, and Charles Bennett's push to oust him was about to crash against a tidal wave of loyalty. The boardroom was a familiar battleground, its mahogany table and leather chairs now a stage for the final showdown. Charles Bennett sat at the head, his wiry frame rigid, his eyes glinting with the confidence of a man who'd never lost. "This company isn't a democracy," he said, his voice sharp as he addressed the 12 board members. "Ethan Caldwell's. Reforms are destabilizing Blue Horizon stock volatility, operational disruptions, media scrutiny. I move to remove him as CEO." Murmurs rippled through the room, some nods of agreement, others hesitant glances. Ethan stood, his presence steady, and placed a single sheet on the table. "Before you vote," he said, his voice clear and resolute, "you should see this. It's the result of the employee vote. 90% of Blue Horizon's workforce supports my leadership and the changes we're making." The room fell silent, board members leaning forward to scan the figures. 90%. Thousands of employees, hundreds of branches, a mandate. No shareholder could ignore. Margaret Ellis, her sharp eyes gleaming, broke the silence. "That's not just support. That's a revolution." Charles's face tightened, his fingers gripping his pen. "Numbers don't change the financial risks," he said, his voice strained. "Shareholders won't tolerate this." "They will." Evelyn Harper interjected, her tone commanding. "Remove Ethan now, and you'll face a PR nightmare. The public knows his story, JFK. The employees fight. You can't sweep that under the rug." The board members exchanged looks, the weight of the moment shifting. Charles had underestimated the power of the workforce, the same people he'd dismissed as expendable. The vote to remove Ethan collapsed, the motion defeated by the sheer force of employee solidarity. Charles leaned back, his defeat etched in the lines of his face, but his parting words were a quiet jab. "You've won this round, Caldwell. But the industry doesn't bend for idealists." "Then I'll break it," Ethan replied, his gaze unflinching. Weeks later, a courtroom in Queens was a stark contrast to Blue Horizon's corporate polish. The air was heavy with the rustle of legal documents and the murmur of spectators. David Thornton sat at the defendant's table, his once impeccable suit now slightly ill-fitting, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The judge, a woman with steel-gray hair, delivered the verdict with measured authority. "Mr. Thornton, this court finds you guilty of wage theft, falsification of records, and financial misconduct. Your actions exploited employees and undermined the integrity of Blue Horizon Airlines." David stared ahead, his hands clenched, his empire reduced to ash. The judge continued, "You are ordered to pay restitution to affected employees, serve 2,000 hours of community service, and are permanently barred from holding management positions in this industry." A ripple of whispers swept the room. Ethan, seated in the back, felt a quiet closure. David's fall was complete. No power, no influence, just consequences. The New York Post ran a scathing expose, detailing David's vendor schemes and the class action lawsuit filed by former employees, including Laura Carter, who'd found her voice again. The industry shunned him, his name a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. At JFK's Terminal 4, Blue Horizon's gate area was transformed. The fluorescent lights still buzzed, but the air felt lighter. The scent of burnt coffee replaced by fresh pastries from a new vendor contract, transparent, competitive, free. "O.F. Thornton's taint." Sarah Coleman stood at the counter, her smile genuine, her movements unhurried as she handed a passenger their boarding pass. The weight of fear was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. Ethan approached, leaning against the counter. "Looks different around here," he said, his voice warm. Sarah chuckled, her eyes bright. "Feels different, too. I don't check the schedule wondering if I'll get fired." She paused, her voice softening. "My daughter's treatment." The restitution from Thornton's case is covering it. Thank you, Ethan. Ethan's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to find words. Nearby, Ryan Mitchell, now a gate supervisor, oversaw a team with calm authority, his denim jacket swapped for a Blue Horizon blazer. We're doing things right, he told Ethan, his voice firm. No threats, no favorites, just work. Ethan believed him. The employees weren't just surviving, they were rebuilding, their voices shaping a new Blue Horizon. The grand ballroom of Blue Horizon's headquarters was alive with celebration. Banners emblazoned with Horizon for All fluttering above a crowd of employees, shareholders, and loyal passengers. Ethan took the stage, his presence understated but commanding. Today isn't about me, he said, his voice carrying over the applause. It's about a promise to every worker, every traveler, that this company stands for fairness, respect, and opportunity. We face challenges, but we're stronger for it. He announced scholarships for employee development improved, benefits, and a council of worker representatives to ensure accountability. Henry Walsh, the elderly passenger from Ethan's flight, approached after the speech, his weathered hand clasping Ethan's. You stood up for all of us, he said, his voice thick. Keep going. Ethan smiled, the words resonating. Later, in his office, the city lights stretching before him, he reflected on the journey. His parents' struggles, the employees' courage, his own resolve, they brought him here. But the question lingered. How many other companies were like Blue Horizon's old regime? How many voices remained unheard? This story isn't just about one airline, it's about power, who wields it, and who pays the price. Ethan, Sarah, Ryan, they remind us that change starts with seeing the unseen, with standing up, together, against systems that thrive on silence. What about you? What change would you fight for in your world? Share your thoughts below. At its core, this tale is a beacon of humanism, showing that courage, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can shift the tides. It teaches us that every voice matters, that collective action can topple entrenched hierarchies, and that justice begins with empathy. At Legacy Stories, we're dedicated to sharing narratives that challenge, inspire, and ignite change. Subscribe to our channel to join us, because stories like these are just the beginning.